I thought the late-night taxi would help me vanish forever, until the driver said my name in the dark, and I realized the man I ran from already knew about my child. Before we dive in, where are you listening from tonight? And if you love Second Chance Mafia romance, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next story. The decision didn't feel dramatic when I made it. There was no thunder, no sudden clarity, no voice telling me now or never. Just a quiet, steady certainty settling deep in my chest as the clock on the microwave flicked from 11:58 p.m. to 11:59. I had 5 minutes. 5 minutes before the city shifted into that strange hour where nothing good ever happened unless you were running or hiding. I moved through my apartment like a ghost, barefoot on cold tile, every sound magnified by fear. The place was small, painfully ordinary. Second-hand sofa, a chipped mug in the sink, a faint crack in the ceiling I'd meant to report for months. It was the kind of apartment no one would ever remember, exactly why I'd chosen it, exactly why I was leaving it behind. The suitcase waited by the door, already half-zipped. I hadn't packed much. Clothes I could afford to abandon, documents sealed in plastic, cash hidden inside a rolled sweater. No photos, no keepsakes, no reminders of who I'd been before learning that disappearing was sometimes the only way to survive. I reached into the kitchen drawer and pulled out the burner phone. Cheap plastic. No contacts saved. No history. I turned it on, waited for the screen to glow, then shut my regular phone off and slid it into the back of the cabinet behind the cleaning supplies. Goodbye, old life. My heart pounded as I zipped the suitcase the rest of the way. The sound felt too loud, like it might echo down the stairwell, alert someone who shouldn't know I existed anymore. I froze, listening. Nothing. Still, I waited a full 10 seconds before exhaling. I slipped on my coat, too thin for the season, but warm coats were memorable, and tied my hair into a low knot. No makeup, no earrings. A woman people would forget the moment she passed them on the street. That was the goal. At the door, my hand hovered over the lock. This was always the hardest part, the point of no return. Once I stepped outside, there would be no turning back. No, maybe I overreacted. No crawling into bed and pretending the fear was just exhaustion. Because this time, the fear was right. I'd felt it all day, that crawling awareness at the base of my spine. The sense of being watched, not seen, not followed, just noticed. As if something old and dangerous had lifted its head and remembered my name. I locked the door quietly behind me and took the stairs, not the elevator. Elevators left records, stairs left only footsteps, and mine disappeared into the night. Outside, the city breathed around me, neon and rain-slick asphalt, distant sirens, laughter spilling from a bar 2 blocks away. Midnight didn't feel like an ending here. It felt like a beginning other people took for granted. For me, it was an escape. I walked fast, but not too fast. Panic made people visible. I'd learned that once, the hard way. I reached the curb and raised my hand, signaling the first taxi that passed. It slowed immediately. Too immediately. The car was dark, clean, anonymous. The kind of taxi you didn't remember afterward. Relief loosened something tight in my chest as I opened the door and slid into the back seat. "Anywhere in particular?" the driver asked without turning around. His voice was calm, steady, familiar in a way that made my fingers curl into my coat. "Just drive," I said, "away from here." The car pulled into traffic smoothly. Silence settled between us, thick and strange. The city lights flickered across the back of his neck, his shoulders, the rigid line of control in the way he held the wheel. I told myself it was nothing. Midnight made every shadow heavier. Fear played tricks on memory. I stared out the window, counting breaths, watching my reflection blur and fracture in the glass. I didn't think about where I was going. I couldn't. All that mattered was movement, distance, putting space between me and a past that should have stayed buried. Minutes passed, 5, 10. Then he spoke again. "You cut your hair." My blood turned to ice. The city seemed to fall away, the sound dropping out as if someone had pressed mute on the world. Slowly, too slowly, I looked up and caught his eyes in the rearview mirror. Dark, knowing. A ghost looking back at me from another life. "Still suits you," he continued quietly. "But you always did like pretending you were someone new." The taxi kept moving. My suitcase sat at my feet. The burner phone felt suddenly useless in my pocket. Because the past hadn't found me. I had climbed straight into it. I stopped at the curb longer than I meant to. The street was nearly empty, washed in the dull sheen of rain and amber streetlights. Midnight had hollowed the neighborhood out, leaving behind only the low hum of distant traffic and the drip of water from fire escapes. This was supposed to be the safest part of disappearing. Ordinary movement, ordinary transport. Nothing memorable. So when the taxi pulled up the instant I lifted my hand, I felt it like a wrong note in my chest. Too fast. I hadn't even stepped fully off the sidewalk yet. No flashing lights down the block, no other cabs circling. Just the quiet, and then the smooth slide of black tires slowing beside me, as if summoned. The engine idled, patient, unhurried. I lowered my hand slowly. For a brief, ridiculous second, I considered pretending I'd changed my mind. Walking away. Ducking into the closed laundromat behind me, and waiting until another car came along, one that didn't feel like it had been watching. Rain misted against my cheeks as I stood there, suitcase handle biting into my palm. "Get in," my instincts screamed. "Don't get in," my fear whispered back. The rear window slid down an inch. "You called?" the driver asked. His voice carried no impatience, no irritation, just calm assurance, like we were already mid-conversation. "I didn't," I said. The word came out sharper than intended. Silence followed, not awkward, not confused. Waiting. I studied the car quickly. Standard taxi markings, plates I didn't recognize, clean interior. No smell of smoke or cheap cologne. Nothing overtly wrong. That almost made it worse. "I just needed a ride," I added, weaker now, as if correcting myself. The window slid up again without a word. The back door unlocked with a soft click that sounded far too final in the quiet street. That sound decided it. Standing still made me feel exposed, like prey pausing too long in the open. Whatever this was, uncertainty was more dangerous than movement. I stepped forward, opened the door, and climbed into the back seat. The door closed behind me with a solid thud. Inside, the world narrowed. The smell hit me first. Clean leather, faintly woody, layered with something darker I couldn't place. Not air freshener, not soap. It was a smell my body recognized before my mind did, and it sent a shiver crawling up my spine. I placed the suitcase between my feet and folded my hands in my lap, forcing myself to breathe normally. "Where to?" the driver asked, still facing forward. "Anywhere," I said after a beat. "Just keep moving." The car pulled away from the curb immediately, too smoothly, as if the route had already been decided. Streetlights slid past the windows in long yellow streaks. The windshield wipers moved at a steady, precise rhythm. Everything about the ride felt controlled, deliberate, practiced. The silence stretched. It wasn't the comfortable quiet of two strangers ignoring each other. It was heavier than that, charged, observant. I became acutely aware of my reflection in the glass, of the driver's hands on the wheel. Strong hands, steady hands. Hands that didn't belong to someone grinding 12-hour shifts for cab fare. I shifted slightly, my coat brushing the seat, and the sound felt obscenely loud. "You don't usually take cabs," he said suddenly. The words landed too close. I stared straight ahead, pulse thudding in my ears. "I do, sometimes." A soft sound. Not disbelief. Amusement. Cold crept down my spine. The city blurred as we turned onto a main road. Restaurants closing, neon signs flicking off. A woman laughing too loudly as she stumbled from a bar, unaware of how fragile safety really was. "I said somewhere quiet," I murmured. "And I heard you," he replied calmly. "I always do." My fingers curled around the strap of my bag. Something was wrong. Not screaming wrong. Not obvious danger. Worse. Familiar wrong. The kind that crawled under your skin. Because you couldn't remember where you'd felt it before. Only that it never ended well. "Is there a problem?" I asked. "No," he said easily. Another pause. "Not yet." The car slowed at a red light, bathing the interior in red. His profile sharpened against the glow, the clean line of his jaw, the straight nose, the disciplined stillness of his posture. I didn't look at his face fully. I couldn't. Some instinct deep in my chest told me that once I did, I wouldn't be able to look away. The light changed. The car moved again. And in the glass, in the briefest flicker of passing light, I saw the truth reflected back at me. The way he held himself. The deliberate restraint. The quiet authority that had nothing to do with driving a taxi. This car wasn't just transportation. It was a closed space. A moving cage. And I had the sudden, terrifying realization that the taxi hadn't found me by chance at all. It had been waiting. The name didn't hit me like a gunshot. It was worse than that. It slid into the space between breaths, soft and precise, spoken with the kind of certainty that didn't need to raise its voice to be obeyed. "Hello, Lena." For half a second, I convinced myself I'd imagined it. That exhaustion and adrenaline had finally fractured something in my mind. I stared at the back of the driver's seat, my reflection wavering in the dark window, my lips parting soundlessly. No one called me that anymore. No one could. That name belonged to another woman. Another life. One I had buried carefully, layer by layer, until even thinking it felt like pressing on an old bruise just to prove it was still there. "I think you have the wrong person," I said, forcing the words past the tightness in my throat. The taxi continued down the road without slowing. The driver didn't turn around. He didn't need to. "I don't," he replied quietly. The city noise faded again, like the world itself had decided to give us privacy. Streetlights traced pale bands across the dashboard, across his knuckles, across the subtle movement of his jaw as he clenched it. Once. I felt suddenly, acutely aware of my heartbeat. Too fast. Too loud. "My name isn't Lena," I said. "You must be confusing me with someone else." A pause, then the faintest huff of breath, almost a laugh. "You always did that," he said. "Pretend repetition could rewrite reality." I swallowed. The tone was wrong for a stranger. Too familiar. Too intimate. It carried the ghost of arguments whispered at 3 a.m, of quiet conversations in places where walls had ears. My fingers dug into the seam of my coat. "Stop the car!" "Not yet." 2 words. Calm. Unyielding. My gaze flicked to the door handle. To the lock. To the blur of passing storefronts. I could scream. I could try to jump out at the next light. I could... "You won't," he said as if reading my thoughts. "Because you know what happens if you draw attention. You didn't run all this way to be careless now." The cold settled fully then, deep and paralyzing. I leaned forward, bracing myself against the seat in front of me. "If this is some kind of joke..." "It isn't." The car slowed slightly as we turned, tires whispering against wet asphalt. He adjusted his grip on the wheel, and the motion was unmistakable. Controlled, practiced. "Look at me," he said. "I don't want to." "I didn't ask what you want." My breath hitched, traitorous and loud in the confined space. Slowly, because I knew resistance would only make this worse, I lifted my eyes to the rearview mirror. Blue. Not just blue, piercing, impossibly vivid. The same shade I'd watched harden and soften over countless nights. The same eyes that used to follow me across crowded rooms, claiming me without a touch. Time hadn't dulled them. If anything, it had sharpened them. The man in the mirror wasn't older so much as refined. His features were harder, the angles of his face cut with something lethal and deliberate. Power had settled into him like a second skin. Damien. The name lodged in my chest, unspoken, heavy. "You're supposed to be dead," I whispered before I could stop myself. A corner of his mouth lifted. Not a smile. Never a smile. "I hear that often." The traffic light ahead turned red. The car came to a smooth stop. For a brief, terrifying moment, the world felt suspended, us alone in a bubble of truth and consequence. "You vanished," he continued, voice still low. "No goodbye. No explanation. You took a name, a past, and everything that belonged to me, and you disappeared." I shook my head, tears burning hot and unwanted. "I didn't belong to you." He glanced at me again in the mirror, something dark flashing behind his eyes. "You did." The light changed. The car rolled forward. "I made sure no one could trace you," Damien went on. "I let the world believe you were gone because I trusted your silence meant safety." My stomach twisted. I was protecting myself. "And yet," he said softly, "here you are, in my car." The silence stretched, thick with everything we hadn't said, with all the blood and fire and fear I'd spent years outrunning. My voice came out raw. "Why are you here?" Another pause, deliberate, measured. "Because, Lena," he said, eyes locking with mine through the glass. "No one disappears from my city without me knowing." My hand drifted unconsciously to my stomach. His gaze followed it, and something in his expression changed. The car slipped beneath a row of streetlights, one after another, each glow slicing through the dark in sharp, unforgiving flashes. Light, shadow, light again. And there it was. His face. No distortion this time. No blur of reflection or memory. Just Damien Moretti, fully formed, staring back at me from the rearview mirror like he had never left. Like he hadn't been the man I'd erased from my life with shaking hands and a stolen name. My breath caught painfully in my chest. Time had changed him, but not in the way time changes normal men. It hadn't softened him. It hadn't worn him down. It had perfected him. His hair was shorter now, dark and precisely cut, threaded with the faintest hint of gray at the temples that only made him look more dangerous. His jaw was harder, the lines around his mouth deeper, etched not by laughter, but by decisions that didn't allow for second guesses. The suit he wore wasn't flashy. It didn't need to be. The cut alone spoke of money that didn't brag, and power that didn't beg. And his eyes, God, his eyes, the same impossible blue that had once undone me completely, now colder, sharper, like they'd learned how to measure a person's worth in seconds. I'd loved those eyes. I'd run from them. "You look disappointed," Damien said quietly. I realized I'd been staring. "I look like someone who just realized the past doesn't stay buried," I replied, my voice thinner than I wanted. A muscle in his jaw flexed. "You buried yourself, Lena. The past was merely patient." The city continued to glide by outside the windows, oblivious. Couples laughed on sidewalks. A man argued into his phone. Somewhere, music pulsed from a club. Life went on for everyone else, while mine folded inward on itself. "I changed my name," I said. "I left everything behind. That life. You. It was over." His gaze didn't waver. "You don't end a life like ours by walking away." The word ours sat between us, heavy and dangerous. I turned my face toward the window, unable to hold his stare any longer. My reflection looked pale, hollow-eyed. Nothing like the woman who had once stood at Damien's side, in tailored dresses and confidence borrowed from his shadow. "You once told me," he continued evenly, "that if you ever left without telling me why, it would mean someone had scared you more than I ever could." I closed my eyes. That memory burned. "You promised," he went on, quieter now, "that if that day came, you'd look me in the eye and tell me the truth." I laughed then, a short, brittle sound that surprised even me. We promised each other a lot of things. The silence that followed wasn't passive. It was restrained. The kind of silence that held violence by the throat and didn't need to prove it. "Open your eyes," Damien said. I did. Another streetlight passed overhead, illuminating him again. For a split second, I saw something beneath the control. Not anger, not triumph, hurt. The realization knocked the breath from me. "You disappeared," he said. "No body, no trail, not a single scrap of proof. Do you know what that did to my world?" "I didn't ask you to look for me." "I didn't stop looking," he corrected. The car slowed as we turned onto a quieter road. Trees replaced storefronts, fewer lights, fewer witnesses. My fingers curled into the fabric of my coat. "Why now, Damien? Why tonight?" Another pause. Longer this time. "When my driver called in sick," he said, "I decided to take the car myself. Something told me I should." My pulse spiked. "You expect me to believe this was coincidence?" "No," he said calmly. "I expect you to understand that nothing involving you ever is." I swallowed hard. His gaze flicked, briefly, sharply, downward. Not to my hands. Not to my face. Lower. A chill sliced through me. "Get your eyes off me," I snapped. His eyes snapped back up instantly, the flicker of control restored. But the damage was done. Memory roared to life. His hand at my lower back. The weight of his palm there. Possessive. Protective. The promises he whispered against my skin when the city slept. And the reason I'd run. "You left," Damien said slowly, deliberately, "because you knew what staying would cost you." "Yes." "And yet," he added softly, "you stayed long enough to take something that belonged to me." My blood turned to ice. "I didn't take anything." The corner of his mouth curved, not quite cruel, not quite kind. "We'll discuss lies later," he said. "For now, tell me something." The car rolled to a stop at another red light. He turned his head just enough that I could see him in profile, unmistakably, undeniably real. "Are you afraid of me?" Damien asked. "Or are you afraid of what happens now that I've found you?" My pulse hammered so hard I was sure he could hear it. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, each word carefully measured, polished smooth the way I'd practiced in mirrors and half-lit rooms for years. "You've made a mistake. I'm not who you think I am." Damien didn't react immediately. That was always the most terrifying thing about him, how he never rushed. He let lies hang in the air long enough for them to suffocate the person who'd spoken them. The taxi rolled through another stretch of darkness, tires hissing softly over wet asphalt. "You used to be better at that," he said at last. I forced a shrug, my shoulders tight. At what? Being mistaken for someone else? At lying to me. My jaw tightened. I turned toward the window again, watching the city smear into streaks of silver and red. If I looked at him too long, I'd crack. I could already feel it. The old pull, the instinctive awareness of his moods, his patience thinning millimeter by millimeter. "I left," I said quietly. "That should tell you everything." "It tells me you were afraid," he replied. "It tells me someone convinced you running was safer than staying under my protection." I scoffed before I could stop myself. "Protection," I repeated. "That's one word for it." He hummed thoughtfully. "And yet, you survived." My hands clenched in my lap. Survived. Barely. I'd scraped together a life from false names and closed doors, from constantly checking reflections and memorizing exits. Survival hadn't been living. It had been waiting. "You didn't answer my question," I said, desperate to regain control. Why are you following me? The taxi slowed slightly, then continued. His knuckles flexed on the steering wheel once.
I never stopped, he said.
The words struck deeper than I expected. That's impossible, I whispered. I made sure. I know, he cut in gently. You covered your tracks well. New name, new city, new face to the world. His eyes flicked to the mirror again, pinning me in place. You underestimated only one thing. I stayed silent. Me. A cold weight settled in my stomach. I let you go, Damien continued, because you vanished in a way that suggested fear, not betrayal. I dismantled half my network looking for you, then buried the rest of the trail myself so no one else would ever find you first. My breath stuttered. My voice broke. I swallowed hard. You erased me. I protected you, he corrected, from enemies who would have used you to get to me. I shook my head. You don't get to rewrite this, Damien. I left because your world was swallowing everything around you, because people disappeared, because blood followed you like a shadow. And yet, he said quietly, here you are, still running, still afraid. The taxi turned down a narrower street. Fewer lights. Tall buildings casting long, watchful shadows. I'm not afraid, I lied. His gaze flicked downward again, slower this time. Intentional. You always say that when you're protecting someone other than yourself. Ice spread through my veins. There is no one, I said sharply. It's just me. Lena, he murmured. You were always terrible at pretending to be alone. I know where you work, Damien said softly. I know the doctor you see twice a year. I know the pharmacy you avoid because the cashier asks too many questions. I know why you only take night shifts when you can. I stared straight ahead, my vision narrowing. I know, he continued, voice level, almost gentle, that you carry cash instead of cards, that you panic when sirens pass too close, and that you changed apartments 3 times in 4 years, without ever filing a complaint. My chest tightened painfully. And, he added, each word deliberate, I know there's a reason you flinched when I glanced at your stomach. Silence swallowed the car. I felt exposed, stripped bare by a man who had once known me in ways no one else ever would. You don't know anything, I whispered. Damien exhaled slowly, as if steadying himself. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, dangerous. I don't need the full truth, he said. Not yet. My eyes burned. But understand this, he continued. Whatever you ran with, whatever secret you're keeping, if it exists, others will sense it too, and they won't be as patient as I am. The taxi stopped at another light. Red washed the interior, turning his reflection into something almost unreal. I'm not your enemy, Damien said. But if you keep lying to me, I won't be your shield either. The light changed. The car moved forward. And for the first time since climbing into the taxi, I realized the most dangerous part of this night wasn't that he'd found me. It was that some part of me was relieved he had. I reached for the door. It wasn't a dramatic gesture. No sudden movement meant to provoke him. Just a quiet, desperate need for air, for distance, for the illusion of choice. My fingers brushed the handle, the cool metal grounding me for half a second before. Don't. The word wasn't sharp. It wasn't loud. It was calm in the way a locked door is calm, in the way gravity doesn't argue. I froze. The car will slow in 30 seconds, Damien continued, eyes never leaving the road. You'll think about opening that door, running, blending into the night. My heart pounded in my ears. You won't make it 20 steps. I turned toward him, anger flaring hot enough to cut through the fear. Are you threatening me now? No, he said evenly. I'm explaining the math. The taxi rolled on, smooth and relentless. There's a man 2 blocks back, Damien went on, as if we were discussing the weather. Gray sedan, rental. He's been switching lanes every 3rd intersection to stay behind you without being obvious. I swallowed. You're lying. If I were, he replied, I'd be wasting time I don't have. My chest tightened. The city outside suddenly looked different. Alleys no longer neutral, shadows no longer empty. You noticed him too, Damien added softly. You just didn't want to believe it. I hated that he was right. I told you, I said, my voice shaking despite my effort. I don't know anything. I'm not involved in whatever this is. You're involved, he said calmly, because you were once mine. I flinched. You were my weakness, Damien continued, not cruelly, but without apology. That made you valuable to men who hate me. I let out a bitter laugh. So this is my fault? Because I didn't stay? No, he replied. It's their fault for thinking you were leverage. The taxi slowed at a turn, then accelerated again. When you left, Damien said, a vacuum formed. Power always attracts predators. Some thought taking you would break me. Others thought turning you would expose me. I stared at my hands, pale and clenched. And did it? His silence answered before his words did. It made me ruthless. The admission wasn't proud. It was factual. Several men died because they didn't understand that touching you was crossing a line even I didn't fully know existed yet. Cold slid down my spine. And when you vanished, he continued, they assumed I'd lost control of the only thing that mattered. The car passed under another streetlight, briefly illuminating his face. Not anger there. Something sharper. Resolve. They've been circling ever since, Damien said. Waiting for you to resurface. Waiting for a mistake. My breath caught. I haven't... You hailed a cab alone at midnight with one suitcase, he interrupted. That's a mistake. The words landed heavier than any threat could have. I'm not holding you here, Damien went on. I'm keeping you alive. I turned toward him fully now. By trapping me? By making sure you don't walk straight into hands that wouldn't hesitate to hurt you just to see if I still bleed. Silence pressed in on us. And what about you? I asked quietly. You're supposed to be, what, my savior? Damien glanced at me in the mirror, just once. No, he said. I'm the reason you need one. The honesty in that stole my breath. If you get out of this car, he continued, you become an open question again. And questions get answered violently in my world. And if I stay? Then you are under my protection, he said simply, as you always were. I closed my eyes, fighting the dizzy rush of memory. His hand at my back guiding me through crowded rooms, his body subtly angling to shield me before danger registered. I'd hated that power, craved it, feared it. You don't get to decide this for me, I whispered. I already did, he replied. The night you left without telling me why. My chest ached. You made enemies when you walked out of my life, Damien said. Not because you were weak, but because you were important. The gray sedan appeared in the side mirror, just as he'd said. My pulse spiked. Damien's voice softened, just a fraction. I won't force you to choose me again. The taxi sped up, the engine purring with contained power. But I won't let you choose death out of pride either. I withdrew my hand from the door. The silence that followed wasn't resignation. It was something far more dangerous. Acceptance. The car had settled into a steady rhythm, the city blurring past the windows in streaks of amber and shadow. Damien drove like nothing could surprise him. One hand relaxed on the wheel, the other resting near the gearshift, posture loose but alert in that way I remembered too well. Like a predator pretending to nap. I sat rigid in the back seat, my breath shallow, my thoughts louder than the engine. I told myself I was calm, that I could still lie, that whatever he thought he knew, I could shape it, bend it, survive it. Then the car hit a shallow pothole. The jolt was barely noticeable, but it was enough. Something slid across the leather seat beside me. Soft. Light. The faintest whisper of fabric against fabric. I felt it before I saw it. My stomach dropped. No, 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 no. Damien noticed the sound instantly. His eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, sharp and precise. And then he slowed. Not abruptly. Just enough to turn a city block into a tunnel. What was that? He asked. My hand moved on instinct, too fast, too desperate, reaching for the object before he could see it. Too late. The streetlight caught it just right as it rolled to a stop near his seat. A small, knitted toy bear. One ear slightly misshapen. Worn soft from being held too many times by two small hands. The air in the car changed. Damien pulled over. Not urgently, not sloppily. He guided the taxi to the curb with surgical calm, shifted into park, and turned off the engine. The silence afterward was deafening. He didn't move at first, didn't speak. I could hear my own heartbeat, fast and panicked, thudding behind my ribs. Slowly, too slowly, Damien turned in his seat. His gaze went to the bear, then to me, then back to the bear. That, he said quietly, is not yours. My mouth opened, closed, opened again. My voice broke. I swallowed hard. It's nothing. His jaw tightened. You don't carry toys, Damien said. You never did. The control he'd worn like armor since the moment he'd spoken my name began to fracture, just barely, like a fault line under pressure. I picked it up, I lied. At the station, Stop, he said sharply. The word cracked through the car, louder than anything he'd said before. I flinched. Damien reached back and picked up the bear. His fingers closed around it with a care that didn't match the fury suddenly burning in his eyes. How old? He asked. The question was quiet, devastating. I don't know what you're talking about, I whispered. He turned fully now, his body twisting toward the back seat, restraint slipping for the first time. How old, he repeated, is the child you're hiding from me? The world narrowed to that moment. The walls I'd built inside myself, years of careful silence, of rehearsed denial, collapsed under the weight of his certainty. My vision blurred. You don't get to ask that, I said, my voice barely holding together. You don't get to... Damien laughed once, harsh and humorless. You left me without an explanation. You vanished. And now you expect me to believe this. He lifted the bear, his knuckles whitening. Means nothing. I turned away, pressing my forehead against the cool glass of the window. I left because I had to, I whispered. Why? He demanded. Why, Lena? Because if I stayed, I would have destroyed us both. Because I was afraid of what your world would do to a child. Because I was already pregnant and didn't know how to tell you without turning my life into a war zone. But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I said the one thing I could. Please, I whispered. Don't. The word did something to him. I felt it. Damien's breathing changed. His shoulders tensed, then stilled. How old? He asked again, and this time his voice wasn't hard. It was breaking. I closed my eyes. 4, I said. The bear slipped from his fingers and landed softly on the seat. 4 seconds passed. 5. Then Damien leaned forward, bracing his elbows on his knees, his head dropping as if the weight of that number had struck him physically. 4 years. He dragged a hand down his face. Mine? He asked hoarsely. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Damien went very, very still. And when he finally looked up at me, the man in front of me wasn't the composed ex-Mafia boss who'd boxed me into a moving car. He was something else entirely. Terrified, furious, and utterly undone. You didn't just leave, he said quietly. You disappeared with my child. Tears slid down my cheeks, silent and unstoppable. I was protecting them, I whispered. From your world, from your enemies, from you. Damien let out a shaky breath that sounded almost like a laugh. My enemies, he said, his voice low and dangerous again, are why that child is not safe without me. He straightened slowly, resolve reforging itself around a new, lethal center. "You're not disappearing tonight," he said. My heart stuttered. "And neither is my child." The taxi engine purred back to life, and the ride changed forever. The first time Lena realized she loved Damien Moretti, it wasn't during one of the lavish nights that blurred together afterward. The rooftop dinners, the silk sheets, the way his name tasted like temptation on her tongue. It was the night he came for her. She'd been 23 then, broke, angry, and stubborn enough to think she could handle the city on her own. Her apartment had been smaller than a shoebox, the radiator screaming louder than the traffic outside, the stairwell smelling of rust and cheap cigarettes. She'd been cornered in the alley behind her building, a mistake born from trusting a friend who turned out to be desperate and careless. 3 men, loud, impatient, too close. She remembered the panic, sharp and blinding, flooding her veins. Then the street had gone quiet. Not empty, quiet. A different kind of silence. The kind that crawled up your spine and told you something far worse than danger had arrived. Damien had stepped out of the shadows like he owned them. He'd been calm. Impossibly calm. His voice low and polite as he addressed the men who had trapped her. He hadn't raised it. He hadn't threatened. He'd simply spoken. And they'd fled. Later, she would understand why. That night, he wrapped his jacket around her shoulders and drove her home himself. He didn't touch her without permission, didn't ask questions she wasn't ready to answer. He listened. Really listened. For a woman who'd spent her life fighting to be heard, that was intoxicating. Their love didn't explode. It smoldered. Damien became her constant. The man who remembered how she took her coffee. The man who left fresh bread on her counter at dawn and hand-wrote notes instead of sending texts. The man who made her feel safe in a city that had always sharpened its knives around her. When she moved into his place, she told herself she wasn't curious about the locked rooms, the late-night calls in languages she didn't speak, the way people fell silent when he entered a space. She didn't want to know. Not at first. It was easy to pretend he was just powerful, wealthy, connected. Until the first time she saw blood on his cuff. He hadn't noticed it. That was what terrified her most. She asked him about it. Gently, carefully. He hadn't lied. Damien never lied to her. "I protect what's mine," he told her, removing the cuff with steady fingers. "And sometimes protection has a cost." The words unsettled her, but she stayed. Because when she curled against him at night, when his hand rested on her back like a promise instead of a claim, she felt anchored. Chosen. Untouchable. Then the truth began to seep in through the cracks. A driver who disappeared. A business rival found dead in a warehouse fire. The way Damien could end a conversation with a single glance, entire rooms bending to his will. She asked fewer questions, but she watched more, and when she realized she was pregnant, everything shattered. She'd stared at the test in the bathroom, heart pounding. Joy and terror colliding so violently, she'd had to sit on the floor to keep from falling. A baby. His baby. A life that would tie her to him forever. A life that would be born into his world. She imagined a child learning to walk beneath crystal chandeliers and armed guards. Imagined whispers following them through rooms, danger masquerading as security. Imagined their child growing up knowing too much too soon. Damien would have loved that child with a ferocity that frightened her. He would have protected them, but he wouldn't have left, and his world would never let them be innocent. The night she overheard him order a man punished, not threatened, not warned, punished. Something inside her broke cleanly in two. The fire of their love suddenly burned too hot to survive. So she ran. She packed quietly, took only what she could carry. Left a ring on the nightstand and a letter she rewrote 6 times before settling on nothing more than goodbye. She didn't tell him she was pregnant, not because she doubted his love, but because she knew his empire would become her child's inheritance, Because leaving was the only way to give that baby a chance at a life untouched by blood and fear and power disguised as safety. She disappeared before dawn, changed her name, started over. And every single day since, she'd paid the price for loving Damien Moretti enough to break both their hearts. Now, trapped in the back of his taxi years later, Lena knew one thing with terrifying certainty. She had escaped his world. But she had never escaped him. The city thinned as they moved farther from the glow of downtown, buildings giving way to darker stretches of road where streetlights came fewer and farther between. Lena tried to steady her breathing, but every shadow outside the window felt like a hand reaching for her. Damien said nothing. That alone frightened her more than his anger ever had. His focus had sharpened, posture subtly changing as if every instinct in him had risen to the surface. One hand tightened on the wheel, the other drifted, not toward a weapon, she didn't see one, but toward something invisible and practiced, like a switch had flipped inside him. The taxi slowed slightly, then sped up. Her stomach twisted. Why are we slowing? We're not, Damien said calmly. The word was a lie. The engine pitch changed again, smoother now, more deliberate. Damien's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, once, twice, then stayed there longer than comfort allowed. Lena followed his gaze. At first, she saw nothing. Just darkness, broken occasionally by the watery gleam of streetlights reflecting off wet asphalt. Then headlights appeared in the distance. Too steady, too close. Her pulse kicked hard against her throat. That car has been behind us for 6 blocks, Damien finished quietly. Ice slid down her spine. You're sure? Damien didn't answer. He took a turn without signaling, smooth and sharp, cutting down a side street lined with closed storefronts and shuttered windows. The city held its breath. The car followed. Lena's fingers dug into the seat. It could just be someone going the same way. Not anymore, he said. Another turn, then another. The headlights stayed with them, unwavering. Her heart slammed so violently she felt dizzy. Damien? His jaw tightened. This is why I didn't let you out, he said, voice low, lethal edge calm. Not because of me. Because of this. What is this? She demanded. He accelerated. The taxi surged forward, tires hissing against damp pavement. Lena gasped, one hand flying to her chest. They found you faster than expected, Damien said. That's on me. Her breath stuttered. Found me? Who? He didn't look at her when he answered. Men who don't miss. The second car closed the distance. Lena twisted in her seat, panic clawing its way up her throat. The headlights loomed larger now, bright enough to paint the taxi's interior in harsh white flashes. They're too close, she whispered. Yes, Damien agreed. The word dropped between them like a loaded gun. Damien, she said, her voice breaking despite her effort to hold it together. If this is about you... It's not, he cut in. Not anymore. Another sharp turn. The taxi fishtailed slightly before Damien corrected it with effortless control. Her stomach lurched. Her mind raced. If it wasn't about him, then... Realization hit her like a blow. It's about what you think I have, she said. His eyes met hers in the mirror. For the first time since he'd spoken her name, she saw something raw there. Fear. Yes, he said. And what you carry. Her hand moved instinctively to her stomach, protective and terrified, even as she hated herself for the reflex betraying her. I don't have anything, she said desperately. No money, no documents, nothing they'd want. Damien's mouth curved into a humorless smile. You always underestimate your value. The car behind them surged closer, engine roaring. Lena's breathing turned ragged. They're going to ram us! They won't, Damien said. Not yet. Not yet. The words echoed in her head. He reached beneath the dashboard and pressed something Lena didn't recognize. A soft click followed. The taxi's interior lights dimmed instantly. What did you just do? Bought us time. Another turn, this one into a narrow industrial lane cluttered with dumpsters and chain-link fences. Damien drove like he'd memorized the city's veins by heart, every movement precise, ruthless. The second car followed anyway. Lena's fear crystallized into something colder, sharper. "These aren't random men," she said. "They know you."
"They know of me," Damien corrected, "which means they're confident. That makes them dangerous."
Her hands shook. "So what do we do?" Damien exhaled slowly, controlled, lethal focus settling over him like armor. "We don't run forever," he said. "We remind them who gets to claim what's mine." The taxi burst back onto a wider road. In the mirror, the second car's grille glinted like bared teeth.
Lena stared at it, the truth finally settling in her bones.
The danger she'd spent years fearing hadn't been waiting behind her. It had been following her all along. And Damien, the man she'd fled, the man she thought was her greatest mistake, might be the only thing standing between her and whatever was hunting the secret she carried.
The taxi didn't stop where Lena expected.
No grand gates, no looming mansion, no obvious fortress crowned with cameras and steel. Instead, Damien guided the car into an unremarkable residential block tucked behind a row of closed auto shops and darkened bakeries. The kind of street people passed through without remembering. Sodium lamps buzzed overhead. A single apartment building stood at the end of the road, brick worn soft by decades of rain, its windows dark and anonymous. Damien pulled into a narrow garage entrance that looked barely wide enough for the cab. The metal door rolled up silently. They slipped inside. The door closed behind them with a dull, final thud that made Lena's chest tighten. For the first time since the second car appeared, Damien exhaled. Not relief. Calculation.
"Stay here," he said quietly, unbuckling his seatbelt.
Lena didn't argue. Her legs felt weak, adrenaline finally draining enough for exhaustion to crash in. Damien exited first, scanned the garage with sharp efficiency, then opened her door himself. His hand lingered at her elbow, not gripping, not forcing. Just there, steadying.
"Come,"
he said. Not unkindly. Inside, the building smelled faintly of old wood and lemon cleaner. The hallway lights were dim but warm. Damien led her up a short flight of stairs and unlocked a door that blended in with the rest. No markings, no numbers. The apartment beyond was quiet. Too quiet. Clean. Spare. Comfortable without luxury. A couch, a small kitchen, a bedroom down the hall. Everything neutral, forgettable. Safety. The word felt dangerous to even think. Damien closed the door behind them and locked it, then locked it again. Lena wrapped her arms around herself. "Is this one of your places?" "Yes." "How many are there?" "Enough," he replied. He turned to her then, fully, leaning back against the wall like the tension of the chase had finally been allowed to settle into his bones. In the softer light, she saw it, lines she hadn't noticed before, the faint shadow beneath his eyes, the cost of constant vigilance.
"We're not leaving tonight," he said. "You won't open this door for anyone except me. No windows, no calls from your burner. If it rings, you let it ring."
"You tracking it?" she asked. "Assume everything is tracked," he said evenly. "That's rule 1. She nodded, spine stiff. "And rule 2? "You don't lie to me." Her throat tightened. "That sounds less like a rule," she said, "and more like a demand." Damien studied her for a long moment, something unreadable flickering behind his eyes. "You lied once," he said quietly. "That's all the space lies ever get with me." The words should have frightened her. Instead, they stirred something deeply familiar. "What about you?" she asked. "Any rules for yourself?" A corner of his mouth twitched. "I don't make promises I can't keep." He pushed off the wall and moved toward the kitchen, filling a glass with water and handing it to her without comment. She accepted it with shaking fingers, surprised to realize how thirsty she was. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the couch. She obeyed again, hating how natural it felt. Damien disappeared down the hall and returned moments later with a folded blanket. He draped it over her shoulders with careful hands, barely touching her skin. The gesture broke something in her chest.
I don't need, she started. You do, he said gently. Your hands are blue. She hadn't noticed she was shaking. The apartment hummed with silence. You always did run when you were scared, Damien said after a moment. Not accusing, observant. And you always mistook control for safety, she replied. A breath passed between them. Then, quietly, I never meant to cage you. She looked up, startled. You built an empire out of cages, she said. You just made yours comfortable. Damien didn't deny it. He sat across from her, forearms resting on his knees, posture relaxed but alert, like he might spring up at any sound. The men following us weren't mine, he said, which means someone thinks you're leverage. I don't have anything, she said again, weaker this time. He met her gaze steadily. You have truth. She swallowed. And you, he added, voice softening, have always underestimated how dangerous truth can be. She hugged the blanket tighter. I don't want this life. You already have it, Damien said. You just stopped looking over your shoulder. Silence settled again. Then, unexpectedly, he reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch light, reverent. For what it's worth, he said. I'm glad I found you before they did. Her heart twisted, confused and aching. She didn't know whether to push him away or lean closer, and that scared her more than the men hunting them ever could. The apartment settled into a fragile stillness, the kind that hummed rather than rested. Outside, somewhere beyond brick and concrete, the city continued breathing, but in here, time felt suspended between heartbeats. Lena sat on the couch, blanket still wrapped around her shoulders like armor she no longer trusted. Damien stood by the window, one hand braced against the glass, eyes scanning a street that offered nothing but darkness and rain-slick reflections. He looked carved from tension, every line of him alert, coiled. You should sleep, he said without turning. We'll talk more in the morning. The offer was mercy. She couldn't take it. If we wait, she said softly, I won't say it. Damien's shoulders went rigid. He turned slowly. Say what? Her pulse thundered in her ears. This was the moment she'd been running from for years. Not him finding her. Not the danger. This. The truth. She stood, the blanket slipping from her shoulders to the floor unnoticed. You asked me for honesty, Lena said. This is it. Damien didn't move. Didn't blink. You're not just being hunted because you matter, she continued, voice trembling despite her effort to steady it. And it's not just because of what I know, or who I once loved. His jaw clenched. Lena. The secret isn't just that there's a child. The words hung between them. She took a shaky breath. It's that the child is yours. The room seemed to lose oxygen. Damien stared at her as if she'd spoken in a language he didn't understand. What? He said. Not denial, not anger, shock. I was pregnant when I left, she whispered. I found out days before I disappeared. I was terrified. Of your world. Of what it would mean. Of what it would make you. His face drained of color. You're lying, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. You would have told me. I couldn't, she said. If I had, you would have locked me down, protected me, surrounded me with guards and steel and bloodshed, and I couldn't bring a child into that, into a war they didn't choose. Damien staggered back a step. You took my child from me, he said hoarsely. Tears burned down her cheeks, unstoppable now. I saved them. I saved them from growing up, counting bodies and enemies instead of birthdays. You didn't give me a choice, he snapped. She flinched. You never gave me a reason to believe you'd choose differently. Silence crashed down hard and brutal. Damien dragged a hand through his hair, pacing once, twice, like a caged animal fighting instinct and disbelief. How old? He asked again, voice breaking this time. Her throat closed. 5. 5 years.
A lifetime of first words, first steps, first laughs, gone. Damien stopped pacing, his hands curled into fists. "Does the child know?" he asked. "No," she said quickly. "They know nothing about you. I never used your name. I never told anyone." "And you hid them alone?" His voice was raw. "No protection, no resources." "I managed," she said. "Barely. But they're alive. They're kind. They don't flinch when a door slams." His breath shuddered. He sank onto the chair across from her, elbows braced on his knees, head bowed like the weight of the revelation had finally crushed him. "I would have burned the world for you," he whispered. "For them." "That's exactly why I left," she replied softly. Minutes passed, then Damien looked up, and whatever lived in his eyes now was terrifying, not because it was violent, but because it was absolute. "They're mine," he said. Not a question. A vow. "And no one will ever threaten my child again." Her stomach twisted. "I didn't tell you so you could claim them like property." He stood, closing the distance between them in 3 slow steps. He stopped inches away. "I don't claim what I don't love," he said. "And I love them already." Her breath hitched. "You don't even know them." "I know you," he said quietly, "and that's enough." His hand lifted, hovering near her cheek, unsure for the first time since she'd known him whether he was allowed. "You should have told me," he said, not accusing, just aching. "I know," she whispered. Damien exhaled, long and controlled, as if locking something dangerous back into place. "The world just got smaller," he said, "and a lot more dangerous." "For us?" she asked. "For them," he corrected. And in that moment, Lena knew everything had changed. Not because the truth was out, but because Damien Moretti had just become a father, and the man who would protect his child at any cost. The shift was subtle at first, almost imperceptible. But Lena had lived with Damien long enough once to recognize it. The man who had been standing in front of her moments ago, raw, wounded, hollowed out by a truth that rewrote his past, was disappearing. In his place, something older stirred. Something dangerous. Damien straightened, the grief in his eyes hardening into focus. His spine aligned as if an invisible crown had settled back onto his head, heavy and inevitable. He crossed the room without another word, reaching for the burner phone he'd left charging on the counter. He didn't ask permission. He didn't hesitate. He became decisive. "Secure the perimeter," he said the moment the call connected. His voice had changed, calm, precise, lethal. "I want eyes on every street within 6 blocks. No marked vehicles. Anyone unfamiliar gets flagged." Lena wrapped her arms around herself. This was the man she'd feared becoming a father. Not cruel, controlled, cold when necessary. "Pull the old network," Damien continued. "Not the public crews. I want the ones who don't ask questions and don't talk when scared. Rotate every 4 hours. Use code names only." He ended the call and immediately placed another. "Get me Dante, and Marco, and I want Valen awake. Yes, wake him. Tell him I don't care if he's bleeding or drunk." Each order stacked upon the next with ruthless efficiency. Lena watched, heart pounding, as Damien rebuilt an empire from muscle memory alone. "You said you were out," she whispered. "I was," he replied without looking at her. "For myself." Then he turned. His gaze pinned her in place. "I'm not anymore." The weight of that statement pressed down on her lungs. "You're calling them back because of me," she said. "No," he corrected. "Because of my child." His jaw tightened briefly at the word, as if it still hurt to say, but refused to stop. "They already know," Lena said quietly. "People are moving. Someone followed the taxi. This won't end quietly." "It ends when I say it does." He crossed the room and crouched in front of her, bringing his face level with hers. For the first time since the truth spilled from her lips, his voice softened, but the steel beneath it only grew sharper. Listen to me, Lena. Every enemy who ever waited for me to slip just found out why that will never happen again. Her chest tightened. Damien! I built an empire before, he said. This time, it won't just be feared. It'll be untouchable. His phone buzzed. He glanced at it once. Too late, he murmured. They've started moving. Lena's blood ran cold. Who? All of them. He stood and walked to the wall panel she hadn't noticed before. With a press and a code, it slid open to reveal a small arsenal. Nothing flashy, nothing excessive. Tools. Purposeful. Final. I don't want bloodshed, she said. He paused, meeting her eyes again. Neither do I, he said honestly. But I won't sacrifice peace to spare people who won't show the same restraint. Another call came in. Damien answered on speaker. They know, a man's voice said. Someone tipped the Eastern crew. Your name's back in circulation. Good, Damien replied. Let them remember. He ended the call and turned back to Lena, studying her face as if memorizing it. I need you to trust me, he said. I need you to stay here. Don't open the door for anyone but Rosa. Don't answer any number you don't recognize. She nodded, heart hammering. And you? I'll be close, he said. Closer than you think. She hesitated, then asked the question she'd been afraid to voice. Are we safe? Damien stepped toward her slowly, deliberately, placing his hands lightly on her shoulders. Not to trap her, not to control her, to anchor her. They can come for me, he said. They can hate me, fear me, plot against me. His eyes darkened. But no one touches my family. Family. The word landed with finality. I would because I thought loving you would destroy everything, Lena whispered. He leaned his forehead gently against hers. And now, Damien said, voice steady and unshakable, loving you is the reason nothing else will. Outside, engines turned over. Somewhere in the city, men loyal to Damien Moretti were waking to orders they hadn't heard in years. The driver was gone. The father had awakened. And the king had returned. The house was quiet in the way only places built for secrecy ever were. Not peaceful, not calm. Contained. Lena sat at the edge of the bed long after Damien left the room, her hands folded together in her lap, fingers numb. The walls felt closer now, not because of danger, but because of certainty. Whatever path she chose tonight would close the other forever. She heard him before she saw him. His footsteps were unhurried, deliberate, as if he were giving her time to steady herself. When he stopped in the doorway, he didn't speak immediately. He watched her the way he always had, too attentively, like he could hear thoughts before they reached her lips. I won't force you, he said finally. That surprised her enough that she looked up. He leaned against the doorframe, jacket off, sleeves rolled, his hands empty. No phone, no weapon, no entourage. Just Damien. Danger still coiled beneath his skin, but restrained. You already did, she replied quietly. By loving me. By making it matter. Something flickered across his face. Pain, regret, something perilously close to guilt. I made you an offer, he said, not an ultimatum. Those aren't as different as you think. He crossed the room and sat across from her, far enough not to crowd, close enough that she could feel his presence like gravity. Stay, he said plainly. Not hidden, not running, not halfway. Stay with me, under my protection, where I can see every threat before it breathes. Her chest tightened. And if I don't? I'll help you disappear, he said without hesitation. New name, new city, new life. I'll make sure no one ever finds you. Her laugh came out broken. You say that like it's mercy. It is, he said softly. Just not the one I want. There it was, the truth beneath the power, stripped bare. You don't get to decide that, she whispered. You don't get to decide that safety only exists inside your world. I know,
he replied. That's why this has to be your choice. She stood, pacing once, twice, the room too small for the storm inside her. If I stay, she said, I live in danger. Your enemies, your rules, your shadows. Yes. And if I leave, she continued, I spend my life looking over my shoulder, wondering when the past catches up, wondering if you're dead because of me. His silence answered her. She stopped walking, turned to face him. You're not offering love, she said. You're offering survival. Damien rose slowly. I'm offering truth, he said. Love doesn't erase who I am. It never will. But I swear to you, Lena, nothing in this world will ever protect you the way I will. Tears blurred her vision before she could stop them. That's exactly what breaks me, she said. Because once, years ago, I believed that. And when I left, I thought I was choosing freedom. His voice dropped. And what did you find? Her throat closed. Loneliness. Exhaustion. Fear disguised as independence. I found a life that kept me breathing, she whispered, but it never felt alive. He stepped closer, not touching, waiting. If you stay, he said, you belong. Not owned, not contained, chosen. And if I leave? I let you go, he said, even though it will destroy me. That was the moment she broke. Not at the danger, not at the power, but at the way he would dismantle his own world to give her a choice. I'm tired of running, she said, her voice shaking. I'm tired of pretending I don't want what terrifies me. She looked at him then, really looked. The man who could burn cities with a whisper. The man who would kneel in silence for his child. The man who loved her without illusions. I don't choose love over freedom, Lena said. I choose the truth. He exhaled slowly, like someone who'd been holding his breath for years. And the truth is, she stepped into him, pressed her forehead to his chest. I'm already yours, she whispered. I just needed to stop lying to myself. His arms came around her carefully, reverently, as if this moment could shatter if held too tightly. Then stay, he murmured into her hair, and I'll spend the rest of my life proving you were right. Outside, the night held its breath. Inside, Lena understood the cost of her choice, and accepted it anyway. Dawn didn't arrive gently. It crept in slow and pale through the reinforced windows, washing the room in gray light that made everything feel exposed. Truths, choices, consequences. Lena stood barefoot at the window, arms wrapped around herself, watching the city exhale after a night that had nearly torn it apart. Somewhere beyond the rooftops, it was over. She hadn't heard the confrontation, not really. Just fragments carried through the walls, muted voices over secure lines. Damien's tone clipped and final, the kind that didn't rise because it didn't need to. Men who asked questions when questions still mattered. Men who stopped asking when answers no longer served them. No gunfire, no shouting. That frightened her more than chaos ever had. The door opened behind her without sound. She didn't turn. You're alive, she said quietly. So are you, Damien replied. That voice, steady, controlled, yet there was something new beneath it. A heaviness, a cost paid. She turned then, and saw it in his eyes. Not guilt, not regret. Finality. It's done, he said. They won't come again. She swallowed. And the others? Gone, he answered simply. Some disappeared. Some learned silence. None will look for you. For us, he didn't say. He didn't need to. She nodded and looked back to the window, fingers pressing into the glass like she could anchor herself to the moment. I heard you give orders, she said. You weren't the man I ran from. A pause. I wasn't meant to be, Damien said. She turned slowly. Then why did it feel familiar? Because you always saw me clearly, he didn't say.
Instead, he walked closer and stopped a careful distance away, letting her choose whether to close it.
You ran from what I was, he said, not from what we were.
Her chest tightened. I thought leaving meant saving us.
And it did, he replied. For a while.
Silence stretched between them, no longer sharp, no longer fearful, just honest.
There's still a way out, Damien said at last. I'll honor it. Papers are ready. A clean future. You and the child disappear.
Her breath caught at the word child. Not secret anymore. Not hidden. She looked down at her hands. And you? She asked. His expression didn't change. I stay.
That was the lie they'd both been pretending was an option.
If I walk away, Lena said, voice barely audible, this ends now. I live looking backward forever. Yes.
And if I stay...
He held her gaze, didn't soften it, didn't promise safety without truth.
Then you live forward, Damien said.
With me, knowing what that means. She thought of the night she fled years ago, the fear, the certainty that loving him would cost her everything. She'd been right, but she'd been incomplete. He wasn't the past chasing her. He was the future that demanded she stand still long enough to survive it. A small sound broke the quiet, a sleepy murmur from the adjoining room. Her heart turned instantly. The child stirred. Lena didn't hesitate. She walked away from the window, past Damien, and into the room where a small body lay tangled in sheets, lashes fluttering, safe and unaware of how close the night had come to swallowing everything. She smoothed a hand over soft hair. Steady, warm, alive. Damien appeared behind her, slower now, watching with something like reverence. You didn't choose for me, Lena said softly, or because of fear.
She turned, meeting his eyes fully.
I choose because this, she gestured between the three of them, is real. And running won't make it less dangerous, only lonelier. He searched her face as if looking for cracks. And if one day you want to leave? He asked. Her answer was immediate. Then we leave together, she said. Or we don't leave at all. For the first time since the night began, something like peace crossed Damien's face. He reached out, not to claim, not to cage, but to rest his hand over hers on the edge of the bed. This is the pact, then, he said quietly. Dawn, not darkness. Choice, not fear. She nodded. Dawn, she echoed. Outside, the city woke completely. Cars moved. Lives resumed. No one knew how close violence had come. No one would ever know the name Lena once used, the one buried along with the woman who thought survival meant solitude. She stayed. Not because Damien was a king, but because he was the only man who stood in front of the fire and said, I will not let it touch you. And this time, she didn't run. She stepped forward,